Merry Christmas, Whitefish! Well, it's official. Winter is sorta here. We did get a nice sprinkle of snow this week, so we'll see if it sticks, or if I need to reschedule my snow tire install at Les Schwab again. After a warm and wet November, the hard-working crews at Whitefish Mountain Resort were able to open the slopes of the big mountain as scheduled. And with that, the crowds came flocking to its snowy peaks like Canadians to cheap American beer. For a little mountain update, let's turn now to everyone's favorite ski patroller, Ryan Friel.
Hello, Whitefish. Variable conditions, early season does exist for us here, but pretty good coverage on the groomed runs and super fun. Let's just be honest, most of our legs aren't really in awesome ski shape yet, so look at it as early season conditioning. Get up here, slide around till your legs burn, then do it some more. That's how you're gonna get stronger. Super fun, not that busy up here. We got a ski resort. 15 minutes up the road, get up here. What are you, nuts? When you're out there, ski with Buddy. Be careful, pay attention, look uphill when you're coming to intersections. Have fun, and have a great day.
Thanks, Ryan. Today's guest is Jeff Hyer. Jeff is a Montana-based media producer and social media personality who creates content on wildlife, national parks, conservation, and ecotourism. His work has taken him to wild places around the world, from the Serengeti to New Zealand to our very own Glacier Park. Jeff is a real beacon of knowledge and inspiration in the realm of eco-exploration and loves to educate and entertain audiences about the natural world. Today's episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. If you would like to help support the fight against human trafficking, visit thriverscoffee.com to order your coffee and make a difference today. Jeff, welcome to Hello Whitefish.
Thank you so much. Hello, Whitefish. Thank you for having me.
Today we're talking about wildlife in Montana, but before we get into it, we got to touch base about how we even started working together. Almost, 10 years ago, maybe?
Yep.
8 years ago?
Yep. I was a junior in high school.
Yeah.
And I was nominated to be Prince Frey, part of the Whitefish Winter Carnival. In the year, we were LVIII. I still remember Joe Akey announcing that everywhere we went. And so along comes this tall guy with you were rocking long red hair.
Yep.
And you wanted to make a film for Winter Carnival. And we were all just like, we're game. We're game. Yeah.
It was like the best possible lineup. It was like Ray and Jerry Boxich, Joe, you, Delaney, and with Brenda.
And all of our add-ons.
Yep. Yeah. That was amazing. We made like the most epic, kind of like mockumentary office style comedy about Winter Carnival.
You know, we need to watch that again.
We should.
As soon as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I might maybe I'll post that on Hello Whitefish.
Please do.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the reason why I'm on IMDb, because I'm an actor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got everyone IMDb credit.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tamed down quite a bit, I hear.
They cracked down a little bit, but they still kind of have this leeway, you know? And especially when you're a junior in high school, you're exposed to a lot at a young age. So they kind of consult you before you start. They sit you down and go, are you ready for this year?
Yeah.
And I go, yeah, of course. You know, you smile, bright-eyed, bushy tail, innocent. And then you see really what they meant. First night at the Northern, I'll never forget.
Oh, man.
But anyway,
love
Winter Carnival, love what it's all about. It's all good fun.
It's great. But let's get into wildlife.
I'm a nature nerd, essentially, at heart. So my origin story starts here in Whitefish. I was born and raised. Yeah. And I've always had a love for the natural world. My real passion started with my first visit at the Calgary Zoo in Alberta. And I really was fascinated by zoos specifically. And what I did is I did something very crafty when I was, starting age 7, ending until I was about 14. Like, this was my hobby obsession, and that was building model zoos. I created model zoos. I collected those animal figurines that you see at like Imagination Station, toy stores, and those would populate these exhibits I built. So these exhibits were miniaturized. I built them out of cardboard, popsicle sticks, Lincoln logs. I used avocado nets as aviaries. And this thing started as a small, placement on the floor, and it kind of grew into this plague that sprawled across the floor. And my parents still joke to this day that they had to levitate over it to exist in their own living room. And they did not limit my creativity at all. And I was so blessed for that. So this thing just grew and grew and grew. And eventually it caught the attention of Ross Strauser, who ran a radio or a studio for a long time in Whitefish. And one of his clients, I guess, was Jack Hanna himself, TV personality Jack Hanna, because he has a place in Big Fork. And so he would come record his narrations for his shows in his studio when he was home. And Ross had this idea. He's like, we know this kid, Jeff, who loves zoos and animals. We've got Jack Hanna coming into the studio on a regular basis. We should create a kids radio show on the internet. We now call this a podcast, right? So I ended up on this podcast called Jungle Jack's Zooniacs for about 9 years of my life growing up here. Yes. So he recruited some other local talent, some kids my age. It was for the kids audience. And that's where I got my start in conservation storytelling, really. So it was a really wild ride. We traveled to all different types of zoos and animal sanctuaries across the country. And of course, we got to hang out with Jack Hanna himself. He was the monthly guest, and he would just, inspire us every single time with all of his worldwide adventures and stories. I swear he would come into the studio and he'd be like, hey, I've got like about 15 minutes. Sorry, I'm a little rushed. I got to get to the airport. I'm going to Borneo today. And so, I was so inspired by his lifestyle and what he was doing, and people looked up to him. So I got to glean a lot of knowledge from him at such a young age. So that's really what launched me into doing what I do now, which is having a platform on social media. I call it my own little nature show, where I share short form and long form videos of me going to wild destinations around the world, talking about wildlife conservation and ecotourism.
And it's it's one of my favorite Instagram accounts.
Thank you.
You do a great job of packaging, because there's not very many people that do that on Instagram, as far as people love to do tourism and like show them in these fancy places, but you don't see a lot of people doing conservation.
I saw a huge gap for it because I really wanted to fuse those two passions of mine together, media and wildlife. So it was just the natural next step to create my own platform where I combine those two things. And it's been a journey to get where I am today. And it's not my primary role, but it's at heart my passion and hobby. And when I get lucky, it takes me even further than that.
Where have you gone? You've spent a lot of time in Africa, I see on your Instagram. And what is your Instagram handle?
Jeff_Hyer, Jeff_Hyer. You can find me on all the video sharing platforms.
Awesome. So you've spent a good amount of time with is it the 2 last white rhinos in the world? That's crazy.
Yes. So I guess the story there is that I've had a lot of experiences in Kenya specifically. When I was in high school, I did a high school exchange there, stayed with a host family, and that is where I got my first taste of the safari life, my first taste for safari, and that prompted more visits. And now I've been a handful of times, but my intention for going isn't just to have a good time, but also to locate these conservation stories and use my platform to tell them. And then on top of that, you're probably like, oh my gosh, Kay, you do a lot of things. I know it sounds like a lot, but I also custom tailor safari itineraries for people now. Because I have such an extensive knowledge of creating trips in East Africa specifically. And so I had the opportunity to work under a travel advisor for many years out of college. I know another 360, but today that's kind of what I do. So I use my platform to not only engage an interested audience, but at the end of the funnel, people come to me to design safari trips for them involving Kenya. So going back to the rhinos. Yeah. Rhinos, I have a special affinity for them for sure. And I have met the last 2 northern white rhinos in the world. It's a subspecies of white rhino. They live at Olpejeta Conservancy in Kenya. And I mean, if you want me to get into the story of it, I can. But in short, I've had the pleasure of meeting them several times, and you can find content on my platforms telling their story, because it's wild what's going on there.
Wow.
Obviously, it's a subspecies that was pushed to the brink of extinction. They used to be widespread across northern regions of Africa. We're talking about northern Uganda, Chad, Sudan, Central Africa, and they were never native to Kenya originally. And so due to habitat loss, some civil unrest happening in those countries, and of course poaching, populations plummeted to just 2. But Njin and Fatu are their names. They're a mother-daughter duo, but they're not actually born in the wild. They're from the Czech Republic. They were born in a zoo, and they were part of a 4 rhino herd. We call this a crash of rhinos. And there was 2 males and 2 females. And so when we started to realize that the populations were so low, they went extinct in the wild. They decided to relocate these rhinos from the Czech Republic to Kenya to put them in an environment that would invite them to breed. So they were relocated to this conservancy called Olpejeta, and it's 360 kilometers of protected wilderness at the foothills of Mount Kenya. It's a beautiful place. I love what this place is all about. They do so much conservation work. They do so much for the local communities there as well. It is the model of ecotourism, this place.
Oh.
So I always try to send people and recommend it to people when they're in Kenya, bar none, because it is so, like, it demonstrates impact safari where your money actually directly contributes towards these conservation efforts. So you get a good experience and you're benefiting the world at the same time.
Wow.
So it's good stuff. So anyway, these rhinos were relocated there. Unfortunately, the males passed away due to natural causes, and the breeding was not as successful as they thought. So there's 2 left, and without a male, you're probably wondering, how are they going to reproduce?
Right.
Well, they're using assisted reproductive technology, IVF, to potentially bring back this species from the brink of extinction. And so there's Northern White Rhinos that used to live in places like the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. And there's a place there called the Frozen Zoo where they've collected semen and samples and eggs from these Northern White Rhinos before they deceased. And so there's a large collection of genetic diversity actually under liquid nitrogen.
Wow.
Yes. So they're using this to potentially, create a viable Northern White Rhino embryo and implant it into a surrogate. Najin and Fatu, the last ones remaining, unfortunately can't carry a pregnancy themselves because Najin has feeble back legs, really weak legs that couldn't support the weight of a pregnancy. And that's partially due because she lived in a concrete exhibit for a large portion of her life. So that impact really hurt her back legs. And Najin, Fatu, the daughter, has uterus defect. So they're actually thinking of planting these viable embryos into a southern white rhino, their close cousin, a different subspecies. So there's several of those at Olpejeta, and they're currently selecting which ones will potentially carry one that will hopefully birth into a live calf one day. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So these embryos are in Italy. There's an international team involved. I've gotten to know a lot of the members. It's called the Biorescue Project. And it's a wild story, They're not collecting any more egg samples from Najin. She's kind of retired in that sense. And to get to go to these places, meet the people actively involved, it's pretty phenomenal. So I love telling this story.
That's incredible. That's interesting. Have you heard of this scientist? I think he's at Stanford, maybe Harvard. He's a geneticist. He kind of wants to do something similar, but with mastodons. And his idea is he wants to populate, I think, parts of Siberia with mastodons using the same kind of thing, like creating an embryo and impregnating it into an elephant. But he wants to do this in Siberia to help bring back as the tundra thaws. They're really good at bringing back, apparently, some sort of flora that will help, I guess, with climate change somehow. I don't know. It's crazy.
Well, there's a lot of controversy around this, right? Because, where do we stop? Where do we stop there? Obviously, the Northern White Rhino is a species that existed for our lifetimes, but we don't have to stop there. We could keep going. This is going to turn real into Jurassic Park real fast. You know what I mean?
Crazy.
But so there is a lot of controversy because people think it's playing God and whatnot. But a lot of people, and conservationists, biologists, they're very excited about this because they feel that we're the reason that their populations plummeted. We owe it to them to have a second chance. And it's also going to be a scientific breakthrough. This is the first time this has ever happened for a species. So Najin and Fatu, they are emblematic of the conservation world. They don't just represent the plight of the rhino, but all endangered species in the world.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a pretty amazing story. And another interesting thing I want to share with you is how they're going to implant the embryo into a surrogate mother.
Right, because rhinos are like large and
in charge,
right? Yeah.
So they've got plenty of selected southern white rhinos, right? Not to be confused with the northern. I know they're both white rhino, but they're separate.
Okay.
And there are a few genetic differences between them. It's not as easy as just implanting it and expecting this rhino to wake up from its deep sleep, its coma, and going, oh, I'm pregnant now. You have to kind of initiate the natural breeding cycle. So what they did is they chose a bull southern white rhino and sterilized him. So he will be the stand-in father. So he's going to essentially mock being the father for this embryo that will develop into a calf. So unfortunately for him, he's going to think he's, breeding like crazy, but none of them are going to carry his genetics. And so this behavior will then, arouse the females. And once this cycle takes place, the timing, everything needs to line up really well before they do the mission of inseminating.
So the rhino has to be in heat, essentially?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So there's 26, to my knowledge, today. They're all in Italy, these viable Northern White Rhino embryos, which are ready to be implanted.
Is there an actual timeline? Like they're just kind of going through the steps to get to that point?
Well, we're all eagerly waiting.
Yeah.
Like I said, a lot of things need to line up. And even if one is inseminated, will it be successful? Because as you know, fertilization is not as easy as just it sounds.
It's got to take and stuff. And yeah.
And they have reproduction cycles.
Yeah.
There's a lot to it.
Wow.
And even if one does birth into a live calf, it's like, we've got one more, went from 2 to 3. Now this needs to be reproduced over and over again to be a sustainable population.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So there's enough genetic diversity so that they can just kind of repopulate.
Right. They're pretty hopeful that there's enough genetic diversity in the frozen zoo
right
now. But to turn that to life, that's the next challenge.
That is a huge undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity has had a huge impact on the decline of many species. I mean, extinction is a natural part of life on Earth, but at the pace that we have impacted it, it definitely is a little tragic.
Of course, a lot of people argue that we're headed towards the 6th mass extinction. And when we look at IVF, assisted reproductive technology, this is something we're potentially very capable of. Even today, I saw an article saying that this one startup company is really determined to use this technology to bring back the dodo bird in Mauritius.
Interesting.
Yeah. So those went extinct a few centuries ago.
Yeah.
But, will they be successful? There's a lot to look into there, but people are taking on the challenge. Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about Montana.
Yeah, sorry, we went all the way to East Africa there. Couldn't help myself.
That's great though. That's what's fun about this show is like we can talk about whatever the heck we want.
Totally. Well, to pivot to Montana, one of the main concepts I love sharing is endangered species stories.
Yep.
So we have our very own here in Montana. So how's that for a segue?
Perfect segue. So let's talk about endangered species in Montana. So if I was like a tourist or someone who just moved to Montana and I had no idea about like the animals or the endangered species of Montana, where do we even begin? How would you introduce that topic?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that this state is very unique ecologically. We're the 4th largest state. We have tons of land, tons of wildlife, biodiversity. We're home to Glacier National Park, Yellowstone. Well, we only have a small sliver, but we're going to claim it. We're going to claim it.
Yeah.
We've also got some other things that a lot of people don't know about, like the Charlie M. Russell Nature Reserve. Do you know much about this?
I don't. I know who Charlie M. Russell is. Amazing painter and Western artist.
A lot of his paintings depict natural settings, so he's looked at as a conservationist in his own right. But the Charlie M. Russell Nature Reserve is in central Montana, and it's patchwork, so it's not all continuous at the moment, but it's about 1.3 million acres of protected American Great Plains.
Wow.
And there's an organization, and a huge shout out to them. They're called American Prairie Foundation.
Okay. Yeah.
And they're working to create the largest nature preserve in the lower 48 states, which would be in this state in Montana, to restore the American Great Plains as it used to be. They're calling it America's Serengeti. And I would love to visit this place. It's in an area of Montana not a lot of people get to.
Yeah.
But if it's done right, it actually could become a huge destination and put on the ecotourism map. So their goal is to potentially connect patchwork by buying up land to be over 4 million acres.
Whoa.
Large. And to have sustainable population of free roaming bison, pronghorn, wolves, coyotes, grizzly bears, birds of prey, all of it. Because, this is what the continent used to be 300 plus years ago. So their vision is to restore that. And so that's something a lot of people don't know about, is what's going on here. So right now they've made a lot of progress. It's a huge undertaking, and they're acquiring land as it becomes for sale from ranchers. And like I said, connecting this patchwork into this huge nature reserve. So that's another reason why Montana is ecologically amazing.
Yep.
We've also got a treasure trove of paleontology discoveries. over in eastern Montana. The first T-Rex fossil ever discovered was found here. Then the second was found here as well. And that's because Montana, throughout history in the Cretaceous period, 66 million years ago, give or take, was flourishing, thriving with organic life.
Used to be more tropical almost.
Yes.
Yep.
It was especially in the east, which is now just grasslands. It used to be a tropical paradise with a lot of biodiversity. So we are still discovering all of these fossils under the dirt. And I really want to go on a dinosaur dig over in eastern Montana at some time. So if any of you are watching, I'm down.
It's so fun. I used to do that as a kid. I was a part of this group called Children for Wildlife, and we would go dig for dinosaur bones. And a cool trick is if you think you found a fossil, if you lick your finger and touch it and it's sticky, it's a fossil.
Right.
Which I don't understand the chemistry, but that's like a trick they taught us.
I do know that trick. I don't know why that works.
Yeah. But it's so fun over there. You just go and you start digging and you can find like eggshells and all sorts of stuff. It's like a treasure of dinosaur bones, and so crazy to think about that tens of millions of years ago, these massive creatures were just cruising around here.
Right. Well, here's something that might blow your mind is that George Washington, first president, had no idea dinosaurs existed. They were only discovered in the early or mid 1800s.
Oh, interesting.
And so the first T-Rex fossil ever discovered was in 1902 by Barnum Brown, who's a famed paleontologist and museum collector.
Yeah.
Although he did discover it, it was in fragments. He didn't really have a complete fossil. So a few years later, he would discover the second one, and this one was a lot more complete than the first. He found a full T-Rex skull. And I just cannot imagine what was going on through his head, because at the time, we didn't have any understanding of the T-Rex, you know?
Wow.
Like, he probably thought it was like an alien, or I don't know what he thought. But it's just amazing all around. So you can actually go and see this at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And I paid a visit to it this summer.
Yep.
Super cool to see that. Obviously, that fossil wasn't complete either, but it was complete enough to get a glimpse at this prehistoric species.
Oh, that place is amazing. I went there this spring too, and just they have such a huge collection of animals.
Oh yeah,
prehistoric animals,
and a lot of it's from Montana.
Wow.
A lot of it, if you look at where they were discovered, you'll find that a lot of them, especially the biggest, best ones in there, part of the collection, are from Montana. Yeah. So I love, the prehistoric. I love ecology, all about it. Prehistoric to present day. So let me think about, one cool thing about that fossil. I think he's unnamed. I think he's unnamed, but that is the fossil that inspired the logo for the Jurassic Park franchise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we know this because the graphic artist did admit this. He took a lot of inspiration from that museum, but also because there's a distinction in its skull, in the nostril, a small bump that most other T-Rex fossils do not have. So that's kind of the link between this one found in Montana and the emblem of Jurassic Park.
That's so interesting. I mean, that's probably just some little evolutionary adaptation that one had. I mean, we think of the T-Rex as like what it is, but I'm sure like in its lineage, there's so many different types and sizes that just sprouted out of that species.
So when that went on display in the early 1900s, this is the first time the public had even known about a T-Rex. So it quickly became popularized. Suddenly it was fabricated in our culture, media, TV. It was showing up as kids' toys. It was showing up in Godzilla. And this is why the T-Rex quickly rose to fame as being arguably the most well-known dinosaur species.
And it's from Montana.
Yep, go Montana.
I know, it's so interesting how kids love it. My daughter loves dinosaurs. It's something about them that kids just are attracted to. It's crazy. I was that way too.
Yeah.
So speaking of those are extinct species. Let's move up to endangered species.
Yes.
What are some of the endangered species in Montana right now that are worth talking about? Yeah,
well, Montana's home to some of the last strongholds of grizzly bears. Grizzlies aren't on the endangered species list, but we put a lot of pressure on them over the decades.
And they are big movers.
They are. And Glacier National Park is one of those strongholds, of course. And then the gray wolf is perhaps the most contentiously debated species in the United States. And they're an endangered species. They kind of go on the endangered species list off. It's a lot to keep track of. People even in the field can't keep track of their status.
Right.
So it's a lot to keep to understand.
grizzly bears have a fascinating history, especially when you look at how national parks treated grizzly bears going back into the 60s in Yellowstone and in Glacier. They had lunch bear counters.
Oh, yeah.
Is that what they used to call them?
So, yeah, grizzly bears, they are seen as a very vicious killer in the forest, a beast, right? And
they can be.
They can be, absolutely. I mean, it's a valid concern to be afraid of bears, but a huge story that really changed our attitudes and has spooked people is the Night of the Grizzlies that took place in 1967. This was a tragic event that took the lives of 2 campers and severely injured another. And this involved 2 completely unrelated bear attacks in the park on the same night.
The same night.
Yeah,
and what's
so this
even
is
more terrifying is it happened at night.
Yep. So this is the ultimate campfire story. This is what you tell your campsite fellow campers before they go to bed so they don't sleep. But the thing is as a conservationist, like I love looking at the story a little bit deeper to fully understand what happened. Because a lot of people attach a spiritual explanation to the event. They think, okay, this isn't a coincidence. What was going on, the energy that night? What was the moon? Because everyone wanted to find an answer. Why were these bears so aggressive? But a lot of people, park rangers, conservationists, they'll tell you that this was a tragedy waiting to happen, essentially. And if we look back at what the norm was in the 60s, and our attitudes towards wildlife and what we used to do, it kind of starts to make a lot of sense. In today's world, that would be a real freak accident, of course. But what we were doing back then is feeding animals with no consequences. Out of our car windows, tourists in the park would actually reach out, feed black bears, grizzly bears, arm their hand. There's photographs of them in Yellowstone. Then you brought up lunch counters. This is something I've done a segment on my social media channels. These are places where people would dump their trash. Hotels would do this as well outside of their hotels to attract bears to come and rummage through it. And these became huge wildlife spectacles. You'll see these photographs with hundreds of people gathered watching dozens of bears at a given time, both black and grizzlies, going through this trash. And that was entertainment. Like no one thought that that was a bad idea. And so as you can imagine, though, this led to all sorts of conflicts and complications. And to think that even in Yellowstone National Park, there was an active landfill happening in there.
Oh, there was a landfill?
There was a landfill until the 70s.
Wow.
We think of the national parks as pristine wilderness areas, untouched. That's a recent development, really.
Huh.
Yeah. To think that the park was established in the late 1872 Yellowstone, that did not mean that everything in the park was fully protected. That just was kind of a geopolitical statement.
And it was Theodore Roosevelt that started it?
Yeah, he was an influential player in creating the national parks, but he wasn't the president at the time when Yellowstone was founded, to my understanding.
Okay.
Oh, and we could talk about him later.
Yeah.
Let's do it. But going back to lunch counters, so in Glacier, this was a common thing. Even Granite Chalet, where one of the bear attacks took place on the Night of the Grizzlies, they were feeding their scraps to wildlife, dumping it out there.
Right.
And so bears commonly subsisted on human garbage. And, we look at the situation of the Night of the Grizzlies, what happened. It's very likely that these bears now have been habituated to humans as a food source. They associate us with food. They discover these campers out there. Of course, camping behavior was different as well. Lack of education. People had probably food in their tents.
Oh, right.
And this just invited danger, essentially. So now that was a huge marking point, a pivotal moment. That was a huge pivotal moment in our understanding of grizzly bears when this event happened, because it caught a lot of attention. And so this is when the park started to enact bear-resistant trash cans, having places to hang your food at night if you're camping out in the wilderness,
right?
And huge, massive education campaigns, briefing people on these dangers and what not to do, what to do and what not to do before even entering through the gates.
Oh,
so this was a game-changing moment when a lot of people started to pay attention.
Yeah. That's so interesting. The whole cartoon of Yogi Bear stealing picnic baskets kind of glamorized it in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do not advise anyone to feed wildlife, not even at the public park when you're throwing bread at ducks.
Oh, it's terrible for them.
Yeah, it is. And I really, not to be the fun police,
Yeah.
I'm the nature police to you.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, once you're aware of the damaging consequences it can have, you'll think twice about it. So my content on my pages, I'm the friendly reminder
Yeah.
of what you should do. And then people go, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So bears is probably the most extreme case.
Yeah.
And I want to bring something up.
Sure.
Because grizzly bears, living in Whitefish, we're used to our trash cans being rolled over when we wake up in the morning and trash just being everywhere because especially in the fall, they kind of come into town.
Yeah.
And are attracted to these food sources. And this is a huge issue because bears become habituated to them.
Yeah.
And so the first solution is to relocate bears away from urban sprawls. But this is expensive and laborious.
Yep. And doesn't always work.
It doesn't always work because bears can smell over 20 miles away. So they will always find a way back. If they know food's there, they will find a way. It doesn't matter how far you relocate them. So it's kind of a lost cause.
Yep.
And so the unfortunate reality is that we have to euthanize a lot of bears.
Yeah.
And this happens when we don't properly store our food. So there's a place in Yellowstone called the Grizzly and Wolf Discovery Center where they do bear-resistant testing.
Oh.
Yep. So it's essentially bear jail. These bears, problematic bears that are experts at what they do, they are sent to this facility, given a second chance at life, because remember the fate for most bears in this situation is that they're euthanized. And this is a place where companies from around the world submit their newly manufactured products to be bear tested.
What?
It's one of my most popular segments on social media because people love bears and they love the story. And when you go and visit this place, you can actually see the graveyard of products that have not survived the bear-resistant testing. And kind of the standard is that if it can survive an hour with food inside, stored inside, and the bear cannot access it, it's bear-resistant. Notice I'm not saying bear-proof because nothing in science is 100% certain.
That's the beauty of science.
Yeah. So this then receives an IGBC logo. So
Okay.
if you're shopping for products in any store and you see this logo, it's been tested at this facility.
Wow.
On the Montana side of Yellowstone. So we'll claim it.
Yep.
And these bears, some of them are from Montana, some are from all the way from Alaska. And if you're lucky enough and you go and visit this place, you can actually watch this happening live, depending on the volume of products coming through.
Huh.
It's a very cool process. And you'd be amazed at what the bears are capable of because you think they're really robust, really clumsy, whatever. They have way better dexterity than you might think. And the other issue that we have to think about is, will humans be able to access it as well?
Right.
Because there's considerable overlap there.
There is. Some of these bear-resistant trash cans are not easy to get into.
Right?
You got to reach your hand up and flick a little lever.
Oh my gosh, it still gets me.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I know.
So that place is super cool, and I highly recommend a visit if anyone has the chance to get there. It's in West Yellowstone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
And that's what the bear-resistant testing is all about. So that kind of stuff, this bear-resistant, that just became part of our vernacular starting in 1967 after the Night of the Grizzlies.
Yeah.
But suddenly we need to start storing our food properly.
Totally. I've definitely had my fair share of bear encounters when I used to live on Lost Coon Lake. Dad and I grew up keeping bees. And inevitably a black bear would come get into our beehive. And at one point, like I remember in the 90s, some people from Fish and Game came out with the trap, curling bear dogs, and they camped out for like 4 nights straight because the bear was just getting in systemically. And whenever they were there, the bear never showed up. And they figured this bear had probably been trapped before and could smell the dogs, obviously, with that kind of sense of smell. And so eventually we did electric wires around it. And even that didn't always work. So, like we would just put bells and stuff. So if we heard that trip the electric fence, it was always black bears. We never had grizzlies. We would just go out with a shotgun, shoot our shotgun a couple times, never at the bear. But the shotgun was a great tool for scaring the bears away. And that's kind of what was interestingly would keep them away is like once we shot just the shotgun a couple times like into the air,
The danger.
I think that sound probably was shocking enough for the bears that we had coming on maybe knew what that sound meant. And that usually was the deterrent. But then we also heard that if you coat your electric fence in bacon grease, it'll cause them to lick it, and that's what gets them really shocked.
Oh gosh.
Because like, they've got thick
That'll come
fur.
with a shock.
It'll come with a shock. So we never we heard that after we stopped having bees, but interesting.
Yeah, lots of deterrents. I mean, there's no one solution, I think.
No. I mean, bears are, we're sharing the land with them, and
absolutely,
they have to survive. They have a crazy metabolism. They need a lot of calories.
And it's really, really hard to undo behavior once they are used to it. So going back to the bear counters in Yellowstone or feeding bears outside of Grand Chalet, it took almost an entire generation of bears to relearn how to source food naturally.
Yeah.
Because they would just teach their young the same thing. So even though we banned bear counters, lunch counters in the 70s, bears didn't go back to their natural behavior for decades to follow.
Yeah, that's a learned, and still like grizzly bear. I think a couple years ago, there was like a grizzly with a couple cubs that came down and had obviously gotten a taste for chicken and just came down and started hitting chicken coops. Like I hit my friend Jesse Miller's chicken coop. He lives up kind of by Haskell Creek. Hit my buddy near Blanchard Lake, and it hit another one up, and they could kind of link it, and they saw the path. And I'm not sure if I think that one might have gotten euthanized, but yeah, they'll get used to a food source, and it's like chickens in a box. Sure, that's easy.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a huge theme I love to share because our coexistence with the natural world just continues to become, we were putting more and more pressure on them as we continue to sprawl. And this is really prevalent to the Flathead Valley. Yeah. Because we're growing faster than we ever have in this area. And the wildlife is getting pushed further and further away. So coexistence with wildlife. This is why I really hammer in my content saying, don't feed the animals, don't do things that'll attract them, because we had this conversation earlier. We're talking about how the first wildlife sighting most people have will be seeing animals dead on the side of the road before they see it alive. And there's many reasons for why that is, but that just kind of shows how we are putting more pressure on them in this coexistence state.
Two Bear Air Rescue, you're familiar with them? An amazing air rescue resource here. One of the things I learned is that when they're doing training, like with new people that they're bringing on to do like air rescue stuff, they've got like this infrared camera, and what they'll do is they'll go up and track or count grizzly bears for like local biologists and stuff. So they'll actually go use their infrared so that they can train identifying animals versus humans, but they also take that data and have been sharing it with biologists so they can kind of keep a track of what bears are around, how many are around, and stuff like that. So
that is very cool.
Pretty cool organization, that Two Bear Air Rescue.
Yeah. I love when there's like a win-win situation. Because like a similar one is remember when I was talking about the Charlie M. Russell Nature Reserve and the American Prairie Foundation. They will actually have a financial reward for how many wildlife sightings you have on your camera trap on your land.
Oh.
Yeah. So if you spot a grizzly bear on that cam, you actually get a bonus.
Wow.
And same with wolves. And this encourages wildlife to coexist with us. Sorry, I just thought that was an interesting thing to mention.
That's interesting. So how do you sign and that's in the Charlie M. Russell Preserve area?
Yeah, I need more information on it. But in eastern Montana, areas where they want to have, like I said, as much continuous land as possible, uninterrupted nature, we'll put it that way. So when this carries over into privately owned land, they want to still invite wildlife there. So one way they've done this, an initiative to encourage this wildlife as opposed to trapping or hunting them, is financially rewarding for what shows up on their land. Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's pretty cool.
Fascinating animal. Grizzly bears are just incredible. And it's one of those animals that you hope to see, but hope to see at a distance, because there are terrifying stories of them attacking people. So you got to respect those crazy bears.
We still run into conflict, but we've come a long way with our understanding of them.
Yeah, truly. So let's pivot to wolves. Wolves are a beautiful animal, but also very controversial up here in Montana. So what do you know about like the history of wolves, which were pushed to the brink of extinction back like 100 years ago?
Absolutely. So I'll start with the question that I'm always asked is, why are wolves controversial? Because you see a lot of news and media about wolves, but there's a lot of confusion around it because they're a very misunderstood species. It seems like one end of the argument wants hunting, the other wants no hunting. But the debate is not solely about whether wolves should be hunted or not. It's about who should govern lands in which they roam and how. So that's the root cause. There's essentially a culture clash in the American West, and wolves just happen to be the impetus for this debate.
That's such a good point to drive home.
There's a lot of varying perspectives, vying opinions about how wolves should be protected, and there's no consistency across the board about how it should be done. So if we rewind a little bit to the early 1900s, there was actually a government initiative to eliminate apex predators from the ecosystem.
What?
Which is a little jarring to hear because, as you know, our attitudes today react to that, thinking, what were we thinking?
Right.
But this was in favor of ranchers because these animals were problematic. And let's not forget that we weren't a huge fan of the ecosystem because it was a way to displace and exterminate Native American groups, as well as a military tactic. I mean, this mostly applies to the American bison, but this also affects predator species as well. And the other thing, too, is that we were focused on fur trading. We were focused on the economy, these types of things. We didn't realize the repercussions of what this would do on our natural resources. So Yellowstone National Park loses all of its wolves by the 1920s. They're extinct there. And they didn't exist again until about 70 years later when they were reintroduced. But before I jump to that, I just want to mention what happened in that time frame when wolves were taken away. And this is a great example of trophic cascade, which is demonstrating ecology and how everything's connected, because wolves being at the top of the food chain, being an apex predator, removing them caused a lot of imbalance. And so there's a huge trickle effect that happened when we removed them. And the first thing that happened is that prey species, elk, their predominant prey species, skyrocketed in numbers. Elk started to overpopulate. And what this led to is overgrazing. And they would start hanging out in places, open exposed areas, especially by rivers, places where they didn't normally hang out because they were at risk of being hunted by wolves. So they're not only overpopulating, overgrazing, but they're hanging out near these streams. This really brought down the vegetation, which really helps mitigate water flow, right? Because vegetation slows this down. And so this increased and accelerated the rate at which water was flowing in the park.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. So this changed the landscape in Yellowstone because erosion was happening at a faster rate. And the other thing, too, is beaver populations plummeted with them because they relied on aspens and this certain type of vegetation that they used to build their dams. They didn't have the dams. That led to more water flow because that helps mitigate it as well. And other things like coyotes, they were super successful because all of a sudden they're the apex predator. And they were over-preying on smaller rodent species like rabbits. Foxes could not compete with them. So you see some animals being very successful in this environment and others not. So total imbalance, essentially. And so this removing wolves didn't just change the wildlife numbers, but the landscape itself.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I imagine having the beavers gone also affected fisheries.
Yes. Yep. Because a lot of aquatic life thrives in slower moving water, shallower water as well. Amphibians. And that's another species that really was affected in a negative way.
Wow.
So you see this imbalance, and we end up reintroducing them in 1995. It's still regarded as one of the most successful American conservation stories.
I remember when this happened.
It was big news. And the reason it was such big news is because it was controversial. Not everyone agreed that that was a good idea. One end of the spectrum did not want wolves back. The other was super excited and thought that this was a necessary step. We have these different opinions, and it still is to this day. But anyway, they get reintroduced. 31 wolves brought from Jasper National Park.
Is that in Wyoming?
In Canada.
Oh, in Canada.
Alberta. So yeah,
Okay.
They're actually Canadian wolves.
Oh.
Yeah. But then some others a few years later were brought from Montana, other parts of Montana. And so we have about 40 or so wolves reintroduced, and populations slowly increased. And around 2010, the population in Yellowstone hovered around 100 and hasn't really grown above that much.
Seems like a small number.
It is a small number, but wolves are very competitive. They roam such a massive home territory that's about the capacity that Yellowstone can handle. But we would probably see more wolves there, but a lot of them get killed each year when they wander outside the boundaries, that protected space. So essentially, wolves were on the endangered species list in the 70s. By the way, that list is kind of the ultimate protection a species can have in this country.
Mm-hmm.
It essentially says no one can lay a finger on them. We owe them this comeback story, essentially, because when a species is on this list, it's taken very seriously. So wolves were on this list until about 2011, taken off. That was also a very controversial decision. And this allowed a lot of hunting, of course, to start back up again.
Right. You have to get like special permits for wolves, though.
Absolutely. So
But
their
that didn't
protections were
stop-
lost.
Yeah, and some people still went after them anyway.
Yep.
There was a lot of wolf poaching that happened around then.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of people. Well, we'll
Yeah.
scratch that part out. But yes, essentially now is wolves, when they're in federally protected areas like Yellowstone, no one can lay a finger on them. They're fully protected. But as soon as they step foot out of that boundary line, they don't see this geopolitical line, by the way. What's the difference between Yellowstone and Montana? They don't know that.
Right.
But they span territory that's hundreds of miles in home range. So it's very rare for a wolf to spend its entire life in Yellowstone.
Right.
Very rare. There's no such thing as a true Yellowstone wolf. So as soon as they step foot in the state's lands, it's up to the states to decide how they're managed.
Right.
And this is where the controversy comes from, because Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, these states, they don't have the same regulations, but the same wolf will travel through all of them in the same season. And the other thing that's really confusing about this, and like I said earlier, not even professionals in the field can keep track of this, wolves are still on the endangered species list. But you're probably wondering, then why are the states deciding? It's supposed to be a federal protection. It only applies to wolves, other wolves in America.
Okay.
So it excludes wolves living in the Northern Rockies, Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, in other words. So wolves are protected in Washington, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan. We have like Mexican species of wolves living in Arizona. And but in Alaska and the Northern Rockies, it's up to the states to decide, which is a unique situation. A lot of people are confused by this. It doesn't really make full sense. And yeah, when we come to the controversy about who decides these decisions, the states have to decide how many wolf hunting permits they give out.
Right.
Who determines that number? What is a sustainable population? A lot of those decisions are politically charged, appeasing to a certain demographic of people, because we have ranchers, we have preservationists, conservationists, hunters, Native American groups, a lot of different opinions.
A lot of different interests.
A lot of interests.
Yeah. And I know there's, so what is the predominant way that people do hunt wolves? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, trapping wolves is a common way. Hunting is, to actually hunt a wolf, that's not super common.
Yeah, you don't really just go out into the woods and go track them. They're insanely elusive.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, even seeing one as a wildlife watcher is insanely difficult.
Right.
Because wolves shy away from people, and they're really difficult to track. So a lot of people trap them when they roam onto their land.
And so what is the argument for the eradication or killing of wolves? Like, why does the group that is against wolf populations, why are they against it?
Well, on an extreme scale, there's a huge misunderstanding of wolves. They're very vilified. They're the big bad wolf.
Right.
You know, we don't see them there's a lot of hatred towards them. And then if we inch closer to the center of the spectrum, people just lack a respect for them in general, consider them varmints on their land, predating on their livestock and whatnot. So they're just like, I don't like the wolves. I don't want them at all. Then there's this middle range where people kind of see both ends of the perspective. And then on the other side, there's people who just feel it's morally wrong to hunt in general, which is pretty extreme as well.
Right.
And I say both sides of the debate are guilty of having really extreme claims. If you drive on the highways in Montana, you'll see propaganda on billboards voicing opinions on both sides. You'll see very graphic images about wolves being trapped and that this should not be happening. And then another billboard with an extreme, statistic that's totally out of line.
Right.
So I think, there's a lot to consider, essentially, when you're assessing what's the best thing to be done. And then the best interest of wolves is not always considered.
Right, exactly. And I think you bring up an interesting point that I think would be interesting to get into is the predation issue. A lot of ranchers will say that we should really not eradicate wolves. I don't know what the right term is, but we should hunt wolves because they predate on if I'm a rancher, I've got a bunch of cattle and a wolf comes and kills some of my calves, that's like, well, I don't want wolves around. So, but I think let's dig into the statistics that we were looking at from, I think this article came out in the Bozeman Chronicle. I think this was in 2021. The Montana Department of Livestock has paid nearly $200,000 so far this year. This is 2021 to ranchers who lost animals to predators. Now, wolves get demonized, but they're not the only predator that goes after ranching animals. What are some of the other animals that go after like cattle and the like?
Oh, well, coyotes would be the second.
They're like the number one.
They are the number one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually not for larger animals like cattle, but yeah, especially chickens, goats, sheep.
Calves, they go after calves a lot.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we don't often talk about the debate around coyotes as much as the wolves.
That's interesting. And mountain lions too. Yeah.
Yeah, so with $200,000 in subsidies, did you already mention that?
Yeah, but let's break that down. So
a huge argument from this community of people is that, it's an economic loss to lose livestock to wolves, which is valid. Of course it is. I would be concerned too. So now there's subsidies available to these ranchers when they lose livestock. And let's see, the statistic here says $200,000 was paid to ranchers this year. This
was in 2021 in Montana. And the Livestock Loss Board, which is a Montana state board, recorded 241 animals killed by wolves, grizzlies, and mountain lions that year, including 106 cattle, 130 sheep, and 3 goats. Oh, those poor goats. The state paid $196,000 to 80 different ranchers. Now, this argument gets thrown around so much that I was surprised when I thought this, because I thought the numbers would be way larger for the amount of animals that have been killed in via predation in Montana, which has millions of cattle and ranch animals.
Exactly. It seemed like a drop in the bucket a little bit.
Yeah.
And if you break it down, that's around $900 per animal. Obviously, cattle are worth more than smaller livestock. But I think what often gets overlooked, I think this is a good chance to mention this, is that the economic gain of having wolves has on Montana.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because yes, this was a huge concern for a long time, and this is maybe not the perfect solution. We'll have to get a perspective on a rancher on that.
Yeah.
But what we don't often talk about is that having wolves attracts a huge ecotourism industry.
This is very true.
Worth millions of dollars. This is what put Gardner, Montana on the map.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was the gateway to Lamar Valley, the most accessible place to wolf watch. And when this hobby became quickly popularized around the world, international crowds started to travel to Montana. So, I mean, when we're talking about millions of dollars in that tourism industry, and I'm kind of looking at this subsidy, it just seems like the gap between those amounts is why I wanted to, it was worth mentioning the gain that we have from having the wolves.
That's so
not
interesting.
Not the cost.
Yeah, it seems like that alone would easily pay for the loss of these animals. And I know these numbers fluctuate. In fact, I think the next year, let's see, since there's not a deadline for producers to file a claim, numbers this year are still incomplete, said George Edwards, manager of the Livestock Loss Board. He estimated claims would trickle in through March. Still, this year is shaping up better for ranchers. So then this is referring to 2022, is shaping up better for ranchers than last year when the Loss Board paid out nearly $350,000 to 125 different owners for 413 animals lost. And numbers in general are down. It's looking like it will be a good year, Edwards says. He doubted the remaining claims would exceed $100,000. Super interesting. But there is this claim that gets made by the people who are kind of against wolves in general, that wolves hunt for sport. And there was this interesting stat, which I've never really understood, because I know most predators, this is kind of globally, especially I imagine with lions too, they don't like to put out more energy than they can to hunt, because hunting is very energy, it takes a lot of energy to hunt.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty weak claim, is that wolves hunt for fun. Because I think that, speaking on behalf of a lot of the wildlife community, wolves have a really hard life.
Right.
They're struggling to survive. They spend all of their energy they possibly can to survive by hunting.
Yeah.
Like, to have the privilege to hunt for fun.
Yeah.
Like, we're the ones who get to hunt for fun.
Yeah, totally. But to play devil's advocate, and I think, there's so much information you have to take into consideration. Madison County was second with 49 animals lost in 2021, including 38 sheep lost to one lone wolf. Ranchers in that county received $66,000 for those sheep lost. So now dogs can be vicious. Mm-hmm. I've seen Jack Russell Terriers do terrible things to animals when they're confined. So at the same time, a wolf is a wolf in that if you saw 38 sheep in a pen and you went after them, it's not, I don't think, probably unreasonable to see that a wolf can do that kind of damage. I think then you have to consider how often does that happen. So this will probably be one example that this story gets told and they're like, this one example is why we need to get rid of wolves out of the state.
That was my thought, exactly.
Yeah.
What rate does this happen?
Right.
How many people gets affected?
Yep. Just because a grizzly bear broke into my chicken coop and killed all my chickens doesn't mean we should be getting rid of grizzly bears. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's really, you got to put it perspective in. And it's like you said earlier, it's a very emotionally charged issue for these people when a lot of their livelihood is at risk. Mm-hmm. But you're going to get paid by the state.
Absolutely. And I think another thing that's worth mentioning is that hunting, not just wolves, but hunting is a huge part of people's heritage in this state. Mm-hmm. And so to feel like that's being taken away from you, that right, is also a heated topic.
Yeah.
And I give people grace for coming from this background, of course, because as soon as you instate a rule that they never had to do until now, they're going to be like, well, I never had to do this my whole lifetime. This is not fair or necessary. Mm-hmm. And I think an example of that is actually when the governor of Montana, Greg Gianforte, was in hot water for trapping a wolf outside of Yellowstone. So it was done legally, but the one thing he didn't have is that he didn't successfully complete a trapper certification course that's mandated in this state.
Right.
So it's like 90% of everything was done right. It was reported and everything, but this one thing. So of course, one side of the argument really blew this out of proportion, I'd say.
Yeah.
They really took that one instance and like really attacked,
Yeah.
Because it was an opportunity to, of course.
Right.
But we look at it and we think, okay, now he's done it. And
he took the course.
He did the course and he's probably now more knowledgeable than ever about the topic. And also, but I think it's an interesting situation to look at to really paints a picture of those in power in Montana, not really taking it seriously. Mm-hmm. Anyway, there's a lot of thoughts there, but
yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
It kind of has the same energy as this, right?
Right.
The one instance happening, really getting blown up.
Completely. The hyperbolic things get hyperbolic very quickly these days. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's the story of 06?
Yeah, 06, I love this story. 06 is probably one of the most famous wolves to ever live in Yellowstone, a rising star. She is named after the year she was born. There's a whole book about it written by Nate Blakesley called, I hope I'm saying his name right, called American Wolf. It's one of my favorite books. And he is a journalist who investigates all the perspectives on wolves. So it's very relevant to our backyard. And he focuses on the story of 06. Who rose to becoming created out of scratch, a dominating pack in Lamar Valley in Yellowstone. And she was super successful at hunting, including large game meat, taking out bull elk on her own without teammates. So she was a badass wolf.
She must have been pretty big.
She was big. And so she established this pack. She also raised several litters without any losses, because that's common in the wolf world. Wolf society is to lose a few here and there. And she became a rising star because she was so viewable. In Lamar Valley is one of the most accessible places to see wolves in the wild. And like I mentioned earlier, they're very elusive. They shy away from people, but 06 was kind of front and center in the limelight. So BBC, National Geographic, she was the star of countless documentaries. And this gained a lot of attention towards not just her, but wolves in general. So wolf watching became a huge thing. And so her story has kind of a sad ending because I think it was 2012, if you remember from earlier, I mentioned in 2011, they were taken off the endangered species list. Mm-hmm. So she wandered outside of Yellowstone with her pack and she was shot and killed by a hunter. So 06 today is now hung up inside someone's house.
Oh,
which is
crazy.
kind of a sad outcome. But in this book, he interviews the guy who shot 06, and he sees her pelt on the wall. So it's a very interesting perspective. And what he did was legal.
Right.
I mean, so you can be angry at him, but you can't reprimand. So it's a great book. I highly recommend reading. And what's amazing about the story is it really shows the power of storytelling to shift our attitudes for endangered species.
Right.
And the wild world in general.
And that's the wild world in general. I mean, that's the thing. It's like nature is a violent place. It's everything is constantly killing and eating each other in order to survive. And
the things 06 went through was a lot of that. Competition.
Wow.
It was a brutal world, hard life. And I could spit facts about wolves at you all day long, but as soon as I personify a wolf, people have a better understanding. And that's what I really try to include in my content is the concept of storytelling.
What are your top 3 wolf facts?
Well, there's about 10 wolves in Yellowstone National Park. There's about 10 wolf packs in Yellowstone.
Okay.
That's kind of a fun fact. Because a lot of people, like you said earlier, are a little bit shocked to find out there's only around 100.
Yeah.
None of them live full time there. They roam in and out. Those are just some of the interesting things. There's about 1,200 wolves that live in Montana.
Oh, wow.
Which isn't a lot, really.
Yeah.
So there's only a few thousand that remain in the wild.
How many do we have in the park area up here? Do you
So
know?
in Glacier, it's very rare for wolves to show up there just because the environment isn't the most suitable with the intense mountains. But on the eastern side, they do come in and out once in a while, and through the North Fork Wildlife Corridor.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so there are wolf sightings there, but it's very rare to see them. I don't know numbers, but it's not very common.
Yeah, so this fishing guide I was on the trip with this fall told me that the North Fork Corridor is the most traveled corridor for predators in America.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's in between 2 really intense mountain ranges, so it's just a natural corridor.
Yeah, interesting.
Bridging us to Canada.
Yeah. So with all these great incentives for people to come to Montana, and they do, to come to our parks, a lot of times in groves, what's your advice for a tourist who's never been to Montana? What are some do's and don'ts?
Oh, well, check out my page because I've got a lot of ecotourism content for you to check out.
Awesome. We'll put a link for sure.
But not just that, but I love to reinforce, that or illuminate our collective responsibility to the wild. That's what my content is all about. I love to, like I said, I'm not the fun police. I'm just the nature police. I want us to all have a good time and coexist with nature so we can recreate responsibly. We can have wildlife thrive in this ever-changing world we live in where we are putting more on them. Just don't do anything dumb.
Yeah. Like, what are the common things that you see people going to do? It's selfies. People want to get selfies with animals. I think that's almost like the new feeding the animals. It's getting a selfie with animals.
I know it can be really tempting to want to get photos with animals. We all want a selfie, you know, even I'm guilty being a content creator trying to get the shot because that's what my content's all about.
Yeah.
But I have to remind myself in the process that it's important to give animals ample space because if you don't bother them, they won't bother you. So you'll find there's this page called Tourons of Yellowstone, I think, or maybe it's just Tourons. And that's the fusion of the word tourist and moron. And the birthplace of the Turon is Yellowstone because that is the epitome of the misinformed ecotourist. It's the great American road trip destination. Lots of dangers in Yellowstone as well. Lots of sticky situations you can get into there. You've got boiling pits. You've got bison that can gore you. You've got a lot to be careful of. So Turons is a place where videos are posted of people misbehaving in these settings and getting into all sorts of trouble. And it's shocking. It's sometimes comedic, but the whole point is to show you what not to do when exploring the national parks.
There's I think my favorite one / most mortifying is that woman who went up to a bison, tried to pet it or to get a photo with it. The bison grabbed her, got his horn around her pants, started flinging her around and ripped her pants right off.
Oh my gosh.
Knocked her out. The bison ran off. Park ranger went after the bison, somehow got the jeans back from the bison. I guess the park ranger was like friendly with the bison because the bison came up to him and like video of it, got the pants off and brought it back to the lady who was still unconscious.
Oh my gosh. Scary.
Crazy.
Oh, that's intense. I mean, we'll have to look at the footage, see if she asked for it or not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is, if we can minimize our interactions with wildlife, you won't run into problems.
Yeah.
Like, you hear these stories in Yellowstone. Do you remember that story when someone put a bison calf in their trunk thinking it was cold?
Yeah.
And so they had to euthanize the bison because once they reintroduced it back, the mother rejected it.
Right.
That's a great example of why you should just let nature be nature and let it have its natural processes. Mm-hmm. Because the key word here is that it's a natural process.
Yeah.
So we don't need Turons going in and doing Turon things.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Whitefish, for having me.
Where can people find you?
You can find me everywhere. I have a very big digital footprint.
Yeah.
I'm on YouTube, where I share longer form vlogs and travel insight videos, where you can get the full adventure. But I love posting updates on Instagram, TikTok. And if a new platform sprouts up somewhere, I'll be on that one next.
Awesome. And then if anyone is thinking about going to Africa, should they hit you up?
Oh, definitely. Send me a DM. Consider your trip already planned. I got you covered. Ready for your dream safari?
Oh, that's amazing. And then also the books that we talked about, Night of the Grizzlies is a book that's based on that night. Mm-hmm. It's an incredible book. Definitely recommend it. Mm-hmm. And then the book of 06.
American Wolf.
American Wolf.
It's not a very long read.
Yeah.
It's super fascinating.
Awesome.
So I love taking inspiration from that book.
Great. Awesome. Well, we'll have to have you again.
Well, if you'll have me, I'll come back.
Wonderful. Right.
Thank you so much, Morgan.
Yeah, thank you.
Goodbye, Whitefish.
Goodbye, Whitefish. Until next time.